There are things you think you know about your family. The way your daughter laughs at the dinner table. The way your grandchildren run to the door when they hear your truck pull into the driveway. The way your son-in-law shakes your hand a little too firmly, smiles a little too long, and calls you sir in a way that always felt more performance than respect. You think you know these things. You think you understand what your family is. And then one Tuesday afternoon, a pharmacist you've known for 11 years grabs your arm across a prescription counter and quietly dismantles every last one of those assumptions. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I am not a dramatic man. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher. I coached junior varsity baseball for 14 of those years. I have been a widower for 6 years, which means I have learned slowly, painfully, how to be still inside a quiet house. I am not the kind of man who looks for trouble. I am not the kind of man who assumes the worst. But I am also a grandfather. And when it comes to my grandchildren, I have learned that love is not passive. Love pays attention. My daughter called me that Tuesday morning a little after 9. She sounded tired, more tired than usual, which had been worrying me for months. She asked if I could do her a favor and swing by Caldwell's pharmacy on Merchant Street to pick up her prescription. She said her head was hurting and she didn't feel up to driving. I told her, of course. I told her I'd be there by noon and I'd bring lunch. She said she wasn't hungry. I told her I'd bring it anyway. Caldwell's has been on Merchant Street since 1987. Marcus Caldwell took it over from his father about 15 years ago, and we've known each other long enough that he knows I take my coffee black and that my late wife used to get her blood pressure medication there every month like clockwork. When I walked through the door that Tuesday, he was behind the counter, and he looked up and gave me a small wave. I told him I was there to pick up my daughter's prescription. He nodded, typed something into the computer, and then he stopped. He looked at the screen for a moment, longer than necessary. Then he looked at me. "Can you come around to the side window for a second?" he said. His voice was quieter than normal. I thought maybe there was an insurance issue, a billing problem, something routine. I walked around to the narrow side window where patients discuss private matters. Marcus leaned forward and kept his voice low. "How is your daughter doing?" he asked. I told him she seemed tired lately, that she'd had some headaches, that I'd been a little concerned. Marcus pressed his lips together. He glanced toward the front of the store, then back at me. "I've been filling this prescription for her for about 4 months now," he said. "It's a sedative, pretty strong one. Your daughter came in herself the very first time, in August." He paused. "Every refill after that has been picked up by your son-in-law." I didn't say anything. "That's not unusual on its own," Marcus said. "Spouses pick up prescriptions all the time. But the refill schedule has been off. She's going through it faster than the dosing instructions account for. I called to verify once, left a message. Your son-in-law called back and said she'd gotten the dates mixed up. He was very polite about it." Marcus looked at me steadily. "I've just been thinking about it. That's all. I thought you should know, since you're here." I drove to my daughter's house instead of going home first. She answered the door in the same robe she'd been wearing the last 2 times I visited. The house was dim, curtains drawn against the November light. My grandson was at school. My granddaughter was on the living room floor watching cartoons with the sound turned low. When she saw me, she jumped up and wrapped both arms around my leg and didn't let go for almost a full minute. I noticed that. I filed it away. My daughter sat down at the kitchen table and accepted the soup I'd brought without argument, which told me she didn't have the energy to tell me she wasn't hungry anymore. I sat across from her and watched her. She looked like a woman moving through water. Her eyes were soft around the edges in a way that had nothing to do with peace. I asked her how she was sleeping. She said, "Fine." I asked her if she was still taking the medication Dr. Harmon had prescribed. She nodded slowly. "It helps," she said. Then she frowned slightly, like she was trying to remember something. "I think I've been taking it every night. I lose track sometimes." I asked her if my son-in-law ever helped her keep track of it. She looked at me for a moment. "He's very good about it," she said. "He makes sure I don't forget." I stayed for 2 hours. I watched my granddaughter watch cartoons. I watched my daughter drift in and out of full alertness, like someone fighting to stay awake in a warm room. Before I left, I hugged her for a long time and told her I loved her. She said she loved me too, and there was something in her voice, something underneath the fog that sounded like a woman trying to reach the surface of something. I sat in my truck in her driveway for a long time. My son-in-law had always been difficult to read. Handsome, organized, the kind of man who always has a reason for everything. He worked in financial consulting, kept irregular hours, traveled often. He and my daughter had met 8 years ago. They'd married after 2 years of dating. My grandchildren were 6 and 4 when they married. From my daughter's previous relationship, a fact my son-in-law had never once acknowledged as anything other than an inconvenience he'd graciously absorbed. I had always noticed the way he talked about the children. Always careful, always the right words, but never warm, never the way a man talks about children he actually loves. I called my daughter's closest friend that evening. They'd been friends since college, and she knew my daughter better than almost anyone. I asked her carefully, gently, whether she'd noticed anything different lately. The pause before she answered told me everything. She said she'd been trying to call my daughter for 3 weeks, that my son-in-law always answered and said she was resting, that the last time she'd actually spoken to my daughter directly, my daughter had seemed confused about what day it was. She said she'd almost called me. She said she was glad I'd called her first. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed in my quiet house and I thought about my granddaughter holding onto my leg and not letting go. I thought about the way my daughter said he makes sure I don't forget. I thought about Marcus at the pharmacy and the way he'd leaned forward across that counter like a man who had been carrying something he needed to put down. I thought about what a man with irregular hours and financial expertise and a wife he'd been quietly sedating might be planning. The next morning I called a former student of mine. He'd been in my junior year history class in 2003, had graduated, joined the police force, and was now a detective with the county. I had taught him about the Boston massacre. I had written his college recommendation letter. When I called, he picked up on the second ring. I told him I needed to talk to him in person. He said he'd be at my house by 10. I told him everything. Marcus, the prescription, my daughter's condition, the call with her friend, the refill schedule, my son-in-law's habit of keeping my daughter isolated from the people who loved her. The detective listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. I can't open an investigation on a feeling, he said, but I can tell you that what you're describing, the sedation, the isolation, the control, that's a pattern, and patterns usually exist for a reason. He looked at me. Does your son-in-law carry life insurance on your daughter? I told him I didn't know. Find out, he said. I called my daughter's insurance agent that afternoon. He was an old acquaintance, the kind of small-town connection that takes decades to build and minutes to use. I explained that I was trying to help my daughter review her policies and asked if he could tell me what was currently active. He pulled the file and told me there was a standard homeowner's policy, 2 car policies, and a life insurance policy taken out 18 months ago. The beneficiary was my son-in-law. The payout was $800,000. My hands were cold when I put the phone down. I called the detective immediately. He told me to stay calm. He told me not to do anything that would tip my son-in-law off. He told me to let him make some calls. Within 48 hours, he had quietly confirmed that my son-in-law had also been moving money, small amounts, steadily from a joint account into a separate account my daughter didn't know existed. He'd been doing it for 11 months. He was building an exit, and my daughter wasn't part of it. I thought about my grandchildren, 8 and 6 years old, a boy who still slept with the nightlight on, and a girl who held onto my leg in a dim living room because she needed something solid to hold on to. I thought about what happens to children when the adults around them are too deep in a plan to see them clearly. I thought about the word merchandise from the video analysis I'd read, and I thought, no, my grandchildren would not become leverage. Not while I was still breathing. The detective told me they needed to move carefully, that they were building a case, that it would take another week, maybe 10 days. I told him I wasn't sure my daughter had 10 days. He told me to trust the process. I told him I'd trust the process and also do the one thing I was uniquely positioned to do, which was be my daughter's father. I started showing up every day. I brought food. I sat at the kitchen table. I watched my son-in-law watch me. His expression perfectly pleasant, perfectly controlled. He asked once, with that practiced smile, whether everything was all right. I told him I just missed my daughter. He said that was understandable. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed it once, the way men do when they want you to feel managed. I started paying attention to the pill bottles. On my 4th daily visit, I arrived earlier than usual before my son-in-law had left for work. I offered to make breakfast. In the small, ordinary commotion of eggs and toast and orange juice, I watched him. He was at the kitchen counter with his back half turned, and he shook 2 pills from a prescription bottle into a small glass of water and stirred it once with a spoon. He set the glass on the tray beside a cup of coffee. Then he carried the tray upstairs. He came back down alone. I excused myself to use the bathroom and instead walked quietly up the stairs. My daughter was sitting up in bed with the glass in her hand. She looked at me with soft, confused eyes. I walked across the room and I gently took the glass from her hand and told her I'd knocked it over. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'll get you fresh water." I tipped it into the bathroom sink. I came back with plain water and I sat on the edge of her bed and I held her hand. By the time I came back downstairs, I had stopped being a man who trusts processes. I called the detective from my truck in the driveway. I told him what I had seen. He told me we had enough. He told me to take the children and leave the house without telling my son-in-law where I was going and without writing anything down. He was very specific about that. Write nothing down. Tell no one. Use cash if possible. He said he would handle the rest. I went back inside. My son-in-law was in his home office with the door closed. My granddaughter was on the living room floor. My grandson had just gotten home from school and dropped his backpack in the hallway. I told them I needed them to put their shoes on because we were going to go get ice cream. My grandson asked if it was a special occasion. I told him it absolutely was. My granddaughter was already putting on her shoes before I finished the sentence. I went upstairs and I helped my daughter stand. I told her we were going for a drive in some fresh air. She looked uncertain. I told her to trust me. She looked at me for a long moment and something moved behind her eyes, something that had been very far away for a long time, and she nodded. We walked out the front door at 3:47 inches the afternoon. My son-in-law's office door was still closed. I loaded the children into the back of my truck. I helped my daughter into the passenger seat. I drove away from that house without looking in the rearview mirror. I drove to my sister's house 40 minutes away. My daughter slept in the passenger seat for most of the drive. My grandson asked 3 times where we were going. I told him we were visiting Great-Aunt Carol. He seemed satisfied with that. My granddaughter fell asleep against her brother's arm. My sister met us at the door. I had called her from the road. She is a registered nurse, and she understood immediately what I told her. She took my daughter inside, sat her at the kitchen table, made tea, and began the quiet work of assessment. My grandchildren ate soup and watched television, and my grandson beat my sister's husband at checkers, which he was very proud of. The detective called me at 6:15 that evening. He told me my son-in-law had been taken into custody, that upon executing a search warrant they had found documentation of the financial transfers, a separate cell phone with messages that confirmed premeditation, and the prescription bottle, which contained pills that were not the medication listed on the label. He said they were working with the district attorney's office. He said my daughter would need to speak with them when she was ready. I sat in my sister's kitchen, and I put my face in my hands. My granddaughter came and stood beside me and put her small hand on my back, the way children do when they sense something they can't name. I straightened up and told her everything was fine. I told her Grandpa was just feeling a lot of things at once. She considered that seriously and then said that sometimes she felt a lot of things at once too. I told her that was very wise. She said she knew. My daughter spent 4 days at my sister's house while the sedative cleared her system. I watched her come back to herself the way the sky comes back after a storm, slowly, in increments, first a little light, then a little more, and then suddenly the whole thing open and clear and present. On the 4th morning, she came into the kitchen and made coffee herself and stood at the window with the mug in her hands and looked out at the backyard where the children were playing, and she said quietly, to no one in particular, "How long was I like that?" I told her it didn't matter now. She turned and looked at me, and her eyes were clear and sharp and entirely her own. She said, "Dad, how long?" I told her. She sat down at the table. She didn't cry immediately. She just sat there, absorbing it the way a strong person absorbs a hard thing, not by falling apart, but by letting it land fully, by refusing to look away from the weight of it. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. "You came every day," she said. I told her of course I did. She said, "I remember you being there. Even when everything else was blurry, I remember your voice." My son-in-law faced charges of domestic abuse, criminal administration of a controlled substance, financial fraud, and conspiracy. The life insurance policy was flagged as part of the investigation. His attorney tried to argue miscommunication, confusion, a wife who had willingly asked for help managing her medication. The text messages on the second phone made that argument very difficult to sustain. The financial records made it harder still. He was convicted on 4 counts and sentenced to 19 years. My daughter sat in the front row of that courtroom with her spine straight and her hands in her lap, and she did not look away from the jury when they read the verdict. I thought about my former student, the detective, who had sat across my kitchen table and said the word pattern. I thought about Marcus at Caldwell's pharmacy, who had leaned across a counter and decided that what he knew was worth saying, even when it wasn't his business, even when it was uncomfortable, even when the easier thing would have been to fill the prescription and let someone else worry about it. I thought about how often the truth about what is happening to someone is visible quietly, partially, in pieces to the people who know how to pay attention. I have been a grandfather for 8 years. I have held small hands at crosswalks and read chapter books aloud until my voice gave out, and attended soccer games in the rain and answered questions about dinosaurs and space and why the sky is blue. I have been, in all that time, an ordinary man doing ordinary things. But I understand now that ordinary is not the same as passive. That showing up every day, that paying attention, that choosing not to look away from something that feels wrong, these are not dramatic acts. They are simply what love requires. My grandson asked me once, a few months after everything settled, why I had come to the house so many days in a row. I told him I had missed them. He thought about it and then said, "I think you knew something." I asked him what made him say that. He shrugged in the way 8-year-olds shrug, too casual to be accidental. "You just seemed like you were looking for something," he said. "Like when you're watching a baseball game and you can tell something's about to happen." I told him that was a very smart way to put it. He said he'd probably be a detective when he grew up. I told him he'd be a good one. My daughter is well now, more than well. There is a quality to her attention, a sharpness, a presence that I don't think was ever fully there before, even before all of this. She says she is relearning herself. She goes to therapy. She has reconnected with her college friend, who calls twice a week and stays on the phone so long that my daughter has to charge her phone mid-conversation. She laughs now in a way that reaches her eyes. It's a small thing. It's everything. I still drive by Caldwell's pharmacy every week or two. I stop in if I need something, or sometimes if I don't. Marcus and I don't talk about it often, but once, a few weeks after the conviction, he looked up from the counter when I walked in and said, "How's your family?" And I told him they were good. I told him they were going to be fine. He nodded once, quietly, and went back to what he was doing. And I understood that some people do the right thing not because they want credit for it, but because they couldn't live with themselves if they didn't. I think about that when the world seems like too hard a place. I think about ordinary people in ordinary places choosing, for no particular reward, to say the thing that needs to be said. I believe there is something that watches over the people we love. I have not always been certain of that. I have had years, since my wife passed, when that belief felt thin and provisional, like a coat that doesn't quite keep out the cold. But I think about my granddaughter holding onto my leg in that dim living room, and I think about the prompting I felt, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet and persistent nudge to keep showing up, to keep looking, to not let the ordinary surface of things convince me that there was nothing underneath. Something moved me toward that family when they needed someone to move toward them. I don't know what to call that. I know it was real. My granddaughter turns 7 next month. She has decided she wants a party with a strawberry cake and exactly 6 balloons. She is very specific about the balloons, and she wants me to be there early to help blow them up. I told her I would be there before she woke up if she wanted. She said that was probably too early. I said I'd be there first thing in the morning. She said okay. Then she said, "Grandpa, are you going to cry at my birthday?" I asked her why she would think that. She said, "Because you cried at my last one, and the one before that." I told her I couldn't make any promises. She thought about this and then said, cheerfully, that it was okay if I cried because she would have extra napkins. I told her that was very thoughtful. She said she knew. If you are watching this and something in your gut has been trying to get your attention about a person you love, about something that doesn't quite add up, about a situation that looks fine from the outside but feels wrong when you stand close enough, I want you to listen to that. Pay attention. Show up. Ask the question that feels too uncomfortable to ask. Sometimes the most important thing you will ever do is simply refuse to pretend that everything is fine when everything is not fine. It will not always be easy. It will not always be welcome. But love is not passive. It never was. If this story reminded you of someone you love, share it with them. And if you've been paying attention to something you haven't yet said out loud, maybe today is the day to say it.